I'm just going to take a few minutes to ask each of you a couple of questions before we turn it over to audience questions. Now, the program, Proposition 227, has only been in effect in California for 3 years. That's not a very long time, even though you have cited some successes. It's not a long time. How do you know that over the long haul, whether it's 3 more years or 30 more years, that it will continue to have the same type of success that it's had now?
You've raised a very good point. Now, during the campaign, let's see, can you hear this? Are we getting
There's
sound?
a slight echo. I can't hear that it's...
Okay.
Is it distorted?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I'll just talk loudly anyway. You've raised a very good point. During the campaign for 227, which occurred in 1998, the opponents of the initiative, again, refused to defend the existing status quo. They said, oh, we know we have problems in the schools, but they said if the measure passed, the result would be a catastrophe. Test scores would plummet. These very low test scores would get much, much worse. Instead, and again, I repeat this one more time, the average test scores of over 1 million immigrant students have gone up by 40% in less than 2 years and continue that rise, so it's now 50% in less than 3 years. Furthermore, those school districts, when you look at the state of California, that tried to keep their bilingual programs showed little, if any, improvement. Those that got rid of their bilingual programs showed dramatic gains. The 40 or 50% average includes a number of 100% gains and a number of 10 or 15% gains in those districts that resisted the initiative. And it didn't only persuade people who already believed in the issue, it persuaded many of the people who opposed the initiative. Now, if we're talking about 10 or 15 or 29 years down the road, it could be that if you take young children and you teach them English when they're in kindergarten, when they reach the age of 40 or 50, their brains explode. And we'll have terrible catastrophes happening in 2020 or 2030 because of this initiative that we implemented now. But when we're doing any sort of scientific analysis, we have to look at the reality of what's happening. The reality is the first year test scores went up by 20%, the second year they went up by another 20%, and now in the third year they've gone up by about another 15%. We're talking about no evidence whatsoever of any adverse consequences. The parents are very pleased. The children are doing very well in school. They're well adjusted. They seem very happy. They are learning English, and they're learning exactly the same sort of English that all these other immigrant groups were learning. Now, it is true, Massachusetts is one of the very few states that has bilingual programs for non-Hispanic students. Virtually everywhere else in the country, bilingual programs are almost solely for Hispanic students, and all the non-Hispanic immigrant students have been always taught English during this 30-year period and done very well in it. Now, maybe there's something different in the brains of Hispanic students than non-Hispanic students. All the others, excuse me, maybe there's some mysterious thing that means Hispanic students need bilingual education, none of the others do, but there seems no evidence for that whatsoever. The point is, if you get rid of these programs, I think the Hispanic students will do just as well as all the non-Hispanic students.
California has the largest Spanish-speaking... California does have one of the largest Spanish-speaking populations in the country, and same in Massachusetts, that we do have most of the non-English speakers are Spanish speakers, but there are a whole lot of others. Now, how do you compare these programs with various languages? How do you compare a program, and this, I want you to chime in here too. This is a short-term program. How much study do you need? How much time do you take to ensure that a program is successful? How do you compare it to the program that was in place, the bilingual education that we have in place now? How do you compare it to an immersion program? Is there a way to do that, to say this is successful and this was not?
Ideally, of course, you'd do a proper experiment. You'd randomly assign children to structured immersion or a bilingual program, and you would make sure that the structured immersion program was as good as it could possibly be and that the bilingual program was as good as it could possibly be. We can't do that kind of random assignment study. So, in fact, what ends up happening is people make inferences from comparing fourth graders now and fourth graders 5 years ago, you're not looking at the same children. You're looking at different cohorts of children. Another very good design would be to actually look at children, follow them through their schooling. And that's what I'm proposing will ultimately reveal the negative consequences of structured immersion for the children who are in it now and were in it last year. That while, of course, if you spend 6 hours a day learning English rather than only 3 hours a day learning English at the end of the year, you might know some more words in English, that if you have not acquired sufficient English competence to actually deal with the academic challenges of 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade school, you will start to show decreasing test scores. You have to do the longitudinal study in order to be able to see that effect. Now, once again, let me say, Mr. Unz keeps saying the million LEP children have increased their test scores enormously in California, and that's true. So have the non-LEP children. So have the LEP children in bilingual education. The comparison that he is offering you is a comparison based on a couple of poster school districts and not looking across the entire state of California at an honest comparison of all the children in structured immersion and all the children still in
If I
bilingual
can
ed.
respond to that, Professor Snow is simply factually in error on that point. There have been studies done across the state of California examining all of the million students we're talking about. In fact, probably the best study was done by the San Jose Mercury News, a very well-regarded paper, excuse me, a very well-regarded paper that had opposed the initiative. It had opposed Proposition 227, urged people to vote against it. After the initiative passed, it spent several months after the first year of test scores doing a statewide quantitative analysis of all the students in the state of California, those who stayed in schools that kept their bilingual programs, those that shifted to intensive English immersion programs with rapid mainstreaming, and the results they proclaimed in a banner headline on the front page was the fact that the students in the English immersion schools and districts showed test scores depending on grade and subject level that were 20%, 40%, even 100% higher across 1 million students statewide than the ones who stayed in the bilingual program. And that was after 1 year. Or if you take, for example, 2 neighboring school districts, a perfect controlled experiment. Oceanside and Vista are both medium-sized school districts right down near San Diego. They both have heavy Latino immigrant populations, very similar demographics, similar size, everything about them is the same. The advocates of bilingual education always pointed to Vista at the time of the campaign and afterwards as the district that was having some of the best bilingual programs in the state, that were keeping their bilingual programs despite the initiative. Oceanside was always denounced by those people as the district that most completely got rid of all their bilingual programs and was doing everything wrong. After 2 years of test scores, the Vista scores had moved up virtually not at all. There'd been virtually no improvement among immigrant students in Vista and reading, while the Oceanside test scores had doubled. Now, when you have 2 neighboring school districts very similar, both groups on both sides admit one of them is bilingual, one of them is anti-bilingual. One of them shows very little improvement at all, and the other doubles their test scores. That's a very useful piece of evidence. And again, a statewide analysis of all the million students showed dramatic gains for the bilingual students as opposed, for the non-bilingual class students as opposed to the ones that stayed in the bilingual districts. The facts are in. It's absolutely clear-cut. And that's the reason all of these people I was talking about in California have switched their sides on the issue.
Now, what does this
Unz,
evidence tell you?